President Biden's garbage smear has quickly entered the Hall of Fame for political blunders. First, there is the still inexplicable timing. His anointed successor, the apparent last bastion of democracy, was standing outside his window, literally, giving what she thought was a career-defining, campaign-saving speech. Why on earth was Biden speaking on a campaign call on Skype at exactly the same time from a few hundred yards away? Who's running his schedule? Next, there was the attempted cover-up. First, an important reminder of what he actually said.
And just the other day, a speaker at his rally called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. Well, let me tell you something. I don't know the Puerto Rican that I know, or Puerto Rico, where I'm in my home state of Delaware. They're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters.
You could uncharitably argue that President Biden hasn't sounded that lucid in years. But the president's team has been spinning like a tumble dryer. The official White House transcript added an apostrophe, arguing nonsensically that Biden was merely describing comedian Tony Hinchcliffe's personal floating garbage.
So just to clarify, he was not calling Trump supporters garbage.
The president was referring to the demonization being garbage from one prominent supporter.
By the way, as someone who had a stutter growing up, it's very obvious to me that there's an apostrophe at the end of supporters there.
What a load of garbage. This could be considered Orwellian if only 1984 was a comedy. The final component of Garbagegate, cementing its star on the political walk of shame, is the Trump campaign's gleeful exploitation of the gaffe. Trump mounted a garbage truck in Wisconsin, a key swing state, before delivering his entire rally speech in a garbage collector's fluorescent vest.
250 million people are not garbage. I can tell you who the real garbage is, but we won't say that.
That shameless opportunism has given the garbage smear another 24 hours of top billing. Cable news has now spent 2 straight days debating a phantom apostrophe. You might not like it, and I fully accept that half of this country seriously doesn't. But Trump is closing his campaign with a real people's man swagger. McDonald's, Joe Rogan, a high-vis vest, and a giant rally featuring Hulk Hogan and Dana White. The Harris campaign, meanwhile, is closing with Nazis and garbage. And we're all still talking about the one thing she really wants us to forget: the current President of the United States. Well, in a moment, I'll be joined by Tim Miller and a superstar panel, plus Eric Weinstein will be here. But first, talking garbage is comedian and commentator Steve Crowder, who's hosting the Rumble on Rumble next week, a massive election live stream that will run until a winner is called, even if it takes weeks. Well, let's go straight to Steve now. Steve, well, good luck with that if it drags on for weeks. Great to have you back on Uncensored. I didn't think after all the slings and arrows of this extraordinary race, including 2 assassination attempts and a change of nominee on the Democrat side, that the one thing we'd all be talking about in the final week would be garbage. And yet here we are. How serious is Garbagegate?
It's Garbagegate. Everything is a gate now. And it's funny when you look back that Watergate wasn't really the gate that we think it is. I don't think we're talking about garbage so much. I appreciate your introduction there. And by the way, people who don't see your Instagram, Pierce's Instagram, he's a natural puller. He's lifting some heavy weight. I'm proud of you. You're doing pretty well. I know you've been invigorated by that. And I mean it. I mean it.
Thank you.
Look, it's not about garbage. Desperate clingers, guns to their guns and Bible, deplorables, Nazis, garbage. The key difference here that we see, and I've gone through this quite a bit because the New York Times has a whole running article, at least between 2015 and 2021, as to all of Donald Trump's insults on Twitter before he was banned. You won't find Donald Trump insulting the American voter like you do with the left. They did refer, we can argue the phantom apostrophe, like you said. I appreciate you recognizing its absurdity. Donald Trump goes after those who are in power, the elites. He refers to the DNC. He refers to the establishment. You may not like him referring to the swamp. You may not like him referring to people inside the Beltway, but he's never gone after the American voters. He actually does respect them, and he's trying to win them over. That's what we're actually talking about. And it's the Achilles heel of the Democrat Party today. They're very elitist. That's the problem with garbage.
Was it still damaging for Donald Trump to have this guy, Tony Hinchcliffe, at Madison Square Garden? I was there, and aside from anything else, the joke fell completely flat in the room, so it didn't work even on a comedic value with him. Although I thought Jon Stewart made a good point that this guy's a roaster. It's what he does. He roasts everybody and everything. But putting that aside, I saw Megyn Kelly and Bill O'Reilly both saying, look, if you're going to get to the last week of a race. You don't want to have people at your rallies insulting the whole of Puerto Rico, given how many Puerto Ricans, for example, are in the state of Pennsylvania, a crucial state. Do you agree with that?
I don't care. And I mean, I know we're discussing perception. Look, I think there's a huge difference, for example, between a roast comedian or an insult comedian making a joke. I think there's a big difference between that and the sitting president of the United States, between biting baby stints, referring to the American voters as garbage. You may not like one, but I don't think that we should be applying the same standard. Donald Trump has never called anyone garbage. Barack Obama referred to half of America as bitter clingers. Hillary Clinton, at least half of Trump voters as deplorables. And you know what? I've heard people refer to that joke as horrifying. I hate it when people feign offense when they're not really offended. Maybe some people are offended. I think a lot of people aren't that offended by the joke, at least not as much as they let on to be. But I've heard a lot of people refer to it as horrifying, that rally. I don't think a joke from an insult comic is horrifying. You know what I do think is horrifying? I don't know if you know this. Adolf Hitler, the Nazis, killed 6 million Jews. I know it's lost on a lot of people. I think that's horrifying. And I think to belittle the horrifying acts of the Nazi Party, the National Socialist Workers' Party, by referring to Donald Trump as a Nazi, which is largely the reason he was the subject of an assassination plot at least 2 times that we know of, I think that's horrifying. But that's just my opinion, and I'll disagree with people.
Well, I actually agree with you, but someone who doesn't is the host of The Bulwark, Tim Miller, who has this to say in response. Tim, welcome to Uncensored.
I was just laughing listening to all that, Piers. Donald Trump's never called anybody garbage. Donald Trump called Kamala Harris's advisors garbage just like the other week. Donald Trump said America is a trash can and the world is sending their garbage, which is migrants here. Donald Trump's called me and other people that oppose him in the media the enemy of the people. He's called people human scum. He said that Haitian migrants were eating cats and dogs. Do we need to keep doing this? Like this, like we're going to pretend to be offended on behalf of Donald Trump? I mean, and Steven Crowder, by the way, his whole career, this is why he's on Rumble, not on YouTube, because he got kicked off YouTube because all he does is insult gay people, insult trans people. The only garbage I know is Steven Crowder and Donald Trump. So they're garbage. I don't think all of Donald Trump's supporters are garbage. I think that many of them are good people that have been misinformed by Donald Trump and Steven Crowder's lies.
Stephen, your response.
Yeah, well, look, one thing, I don't like the way that these panels sometimes some people descend into nothing but ad hominem and interrupt each other. So I promise you, I'm going to respect your time, and you will not hear me speak a single time today, not one interruption, until you hear this bell. I just ask that you give me the floor. So not going to address the ad hominem, but I've never been banned from YouTube. As a matter of fact, this will be up on YouTube. The election live stream of the century will be on YouTube as well. Every single example that was just given was not addressed to the American people at large, and not even the Democrat voting base at large. America is for Americans. Are black people not Americans? Are Hispanic Americans not Americans? The qualifier that I have always made, and Donald Trump has always made, and the reason that so many Americans support him is because there aren't those qualifiers of race that we see in identity politics. Every single example, I could go through all of them, the people around Kamala Harris, the people surrounding her, are scum and garbage. That's not going to be misinterpreted as Kamala's supporters are garbage. The voters of Donald Trump are deplorable. These people are scum. Kamala Harris is dumb, whatever he said. That's very different from the hatred, the reviling of the American voter. Your floor.
Yeah, you know what, Tim Miller, what I would say is, people on the left, they're very, very quick to be very offended by Trump's rhetoric. This has been going on for 8 years now, that this guy talks in a disparaging way about people. It's unacceptable, it's awful, blah, 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 blah. But you think nothing as a group of constantly flashing the Nazi word around, fascist, Nazi, and now garbage. Why is it one rule for Trump? Why do you want him to clean up the way he talks, but a completely different set of rules for your own side? Why are you allowed to just go around calling people mass murderers?
I'm not. Like I said, the only people I called garbage were Donald Trump and Steven Crowder because they've acted like garbage by disparaging people their entire careers. Like that was the whole premise of both of these two guys' careers. Donald Trump's just been a little bit more successful at it. So Joe Biden's statement, I think, was like totally nonsensical marble mouth. And I was maybe one of the most vocal people saying Joe Biden shouldn't run for president again. Joe Biden isn't running for president. Kamala Harris is running for president. And she gave a speech on the Ellipse where she talked about how MAGA voters would have and MAGA politicians would have a seat at the table in her administration. So you guys are trying to make something out of nothing, and you're trying to do this fake outrage where it's like in soccer, Piers, where you guys are flopping. You're flopping on the ground, hoping the refs call a foul on Joe Biden, when Donald Trump's whole career has been insults and lies and disparaging people, and also his actual actions have been hurtful. You know, the sexual assault that he committed on women, the fact that he banned people from coming to this country based on their religion, the separating of family. We could just go on and on about Donald Trump's behavior, the cops that got injured at the Capitol because of the riot that he started. So Donald Trump, it's not just his words, it's his actions that have been harmful. And you guys can get mad about what the soon-to-be former president, Joe Biden, like incomprehensibly said, but he's not running against Joe Biden. And it seems like a desperate ploy to like put on a fancy costume and dress up like an Oompa Loompa.
All right, Stephen, I mean, last time I checked, Joe Biden remains the current president of the United States. He is the leader of the free world. And for him to pop up as Kamala Harris is delivering her supposed great final mission statement to the electorate on a Skype call, calling half of America garbage, struck me as just, never mind anything else, incredibly bad timing, to the point where you think, was that deliberate? Is he trying to sabotage her?
Thank you. But again, I'm really going to avoid ad hominem, which is really tough because it seems to be coming from the other side of this panel here.
Well, I will note for the record that you have not gone ad hominem. And Tim, to be fair, all you've done is abuse Steve. All you've done is abuse Stephen on a personal level. I actually would like to rise above that.
His whole career is all he's done is attack gay and trans people. Now he's like, he's getting offended, being called out for it. Just Google his history of his comments about gays, trans people, women. Like he is Mr. Ad hominem. So don't like try to be like, oh, I'm Mr. Nice Guy now. Come on, give me a break. Let's be honest.
Stephen?
Okay, thank you for giving me the floor. As far as it being ill-advised, I would say so with Joe Biden. The problem is that Kamala Harris was given so many opportunities to distance herself from Joe Biden. The Biden-Harris administration, she chose not to. She said there's not a thing that she would do differently, and she was one of his most important advisors in all of the decisions that had an impact. Vice presidents aren't always given such an easily identifiable pet project. She was. And I know the talking point is she wasn't the border czar, even though Biden said that. The point is she was in charge of, she was being tasked with discovering the root cause of the immigration issue. Well, we had 3 million under Donald Trump's tenure, and now we have at least 15 to 20 million on the low end. That is a huge impact that affects Americans. If we want to talk about Donald Trump's actions hurting Americans, look, I guess we're back to 2016. The issue is no Americans have lived actions that have harmed them more than the latest administration. They've lived it. They lived Donald Trump for 4 years. They've lived Biden-Harris for 4 years. It doesn't work. It falls on deaf ears. It's like Paul Revere always saying, the exact same economy is coming. The exact same economy is coming. If you want to talk about actions that have hurt, I would argue that the actions on the border, the actions on American energy, the policies, which I would like to discuss, have hurt Americans. It's why they're rejecting Kamala Harris. It's why they trust Donald Trump more on issues like the economy and immigration. And by the way, I'm one of them, but the point remains, not one example has been presented. And by the way, I'm not offended by any of this. You haven't heard me feign outrage. I've just tried to describe the situation, why Americans don't like it. Not one example at all of Donald Trump referring to the American people at large as garbage or insulting them as the Democrat Party does every single election cycle. Your floor.
The other thing I would say to you, Tim, is what I find as an ongoing bizarre set of circumstances is that I keep hearing again from the left that Trump is the most racist candidate there's ever been, etc. He's a fascist and so on. How do you explain, if that is the case, how do you explain that his support amongst Black and Latino Americans is rising to record levels for him in the last 8 years? Why is that happening? Why are they gravitating to somebody who is supposedly this terrible racist?
I mean, we haven't voted yet, Pierce, so let's see how that turns out next week. It looks like we're going to have a record turnout in Detroit, they just said. We'll see if there's a surprising turnout for Donald Trump there. I kind of doubt it. But this whole thing that's like, you guys want to play in this fantasy pretend world where it's like Donald Trump doesn't insult people. What? Like, everyone watching knows that's not true. Why is the left calling Donald Trump a fascist? The left isn't calling Donald Trump a fascist. John Kelly, who Donald Trump made the head of his Department of Homeland Security, who oversaw the Muslim ban 1.0, and then Donald Trump promoted him to chief of staff. And then he was his longest serving chief of staff. He wasn't a never Trumper like me. He wasn't a moderate Republican rhino. He's a down the line conservative American hero that Donald Trump hired twice, who says he is concerned that Donald Trump has fascist tendencies. And there were times during the first administration where Donald Trump wanted to do things against the law, and it required him and Mattis and Milley and others to prevent him from doing it. And he's worried that those guardrails won't be around the next term. So it's not the left, it's not MSNBC, it's not wild-eyed liberals. It's John Kelly, a conservative American hero that Donald Trump hired twice, that is saying that about him. And you guys need to reckon with that rather than just pointing fingers.
All right. I mean, Stephen, that's a fair point. There have been a number of people of John Kelly's ilk who have come forward and said they think Trump is dangerous, who did work with him at the White House. What's your response to that?
Thank you. Well, this is the same John Kelly, by the way, in The Atlantic, the same journalist who spouted the losers and suckers lie, right? This is a disgruntled former employee. Now, maybe it's true, only that same article included Donald Trump saying that we don't need to spend that much for an effing Mexican. By the way, the soldier's family immediately came out and refuted it. So if we're going to talk about people who don't like him, he said, she said, we can do that, or we can discuss the results for the American people and what affects them at large. We can reckon with that. There you go. That's the reckoning. I don't really care what John Kelly says, but here's the fundamental dynamic. And this is why the left, and this is certainly why legacy media, I'm not saying the media, but legacy media, ABC, NBC, CBS, and big tech, they're demanding that Americans trust their institutions, and they're blaming Americans for not trusting their institutions. This article in The Atlantic, John Kelly, is exactly why Americans don't trust those institutions. I trust the family of the soldier, not John Kelly. I trust the American people who want us to have voter ID, not people who say the most secure and fair elections of all time. When we look at the Hunter Biden laptop story, which I know will be dismissed and people say that it was allowed to after a day, that's the perfect encapsulation of the institutions that we're demanded to trust who have failed us, whether it's intelligence officials, whether it's Facebook and the CEO of which apologizing afterwards, Jack Dorsey, YouTube's, the fundamental Democratic Party, and we're told, wait, trust your institutions. Well, I don't trust the institutions that repeat lies that have been debunked, including some specifically from John Kelly. I don't trust those publications. I trust the voice of the family of that soldier. And by the way, the families of all the soldiers who overwhelmingly support Donald Trump and the Republican platform, in contrast to Kamala Harris. Your floor.
Tim Miller, I want to talk to you directly about the fact you went down to confront the MAGA mastermind, Steve Bannon, when he was released from prison at his press conference. And Bannon decided to have a bit of fun at your expense. Let's take a look.
This is Tim Miller, one of my favorite guys from MSNBC in the Bulwark. Used to be the spokesman for the Republic. When I met Tim as a younger man, he was the spokesman for the RNC, the old RNC, the establishment RNC, the RNC of Mitt Romney, not the RNC of Donald Trump. But go ahead, Tim. Question.
Tim, I mean, you went down, you quizzed him on whether he would attempt another coup as an encore to January 6th, and Bannon gave quite a serious response. Let's take a look at that.
Nancy Pelosi gave an interview to Rolling Stone magazine. She said her number one priority is to make sure that Donald Trump is not only not elected, a re-elected president of the United States, but he never sets foot in the White House. Nancy Pelosi and Jamie Raskin right now are thinking about, and they're very open about it, of not certifying a Trump victory on November 5th.
So, Tim, I know you're going to leave us in a few minutes. Just your response, really, to what Bannon said there.
Well, that comment is based on nothing. I do think that there's kind of a delusion in there's sort of this every accusation is a confession a little bit sometimes with people in MAGA, where it's like they're not going to certify the election, like we didn't certify the election. If Donald Trump wins, the Democrats are going to certify the election last time, just like the Democrats did in 2000 in a much, much, much closer election than 2020 when Al Gore conceded to George W. Bush after his legal challenges had been exercised. Donald Trump didn't do that. And when I asked Steve that you didn't play there, and I've quizzed Steve many times. I interviewed him on the circus several times. We've gone back and forth, and so it wasn't like I was confronting him. They invited me to the press conference, and what I asked him there was he got out of prison, and I was wondering if sometimes when people get out of prison, they feel like they're reformed, and they look back on their actions and they say, you know what, maybe I went too far. Maybe in 2020, by advancing these lies about the election, I thought it was all part of the political game, but then things got out of hand. Dozens of police were injured. The vice president had to be scurried off by Secret Service. The vice president's life was in danger. Senators and House members' lives were in danger. I was really the ringleader of pushing that in the media, in the MAGA media world. And given that the results ended up so disastrously for the country and for those individuals who were harmed that serve our country, maybe those 4 months in low security prison, he had a chance to reflect on that and say, you know what, next time I'll do things differently. And I got to say, I was pretty alarmed that the answer to that question was no. He did not. He doesn't see that he'll do any change. And if we are in a similar situation this time, I think both him and Donald Trump will act the same way, and I find that very alarming.
Final question, Tim, before you go. Who do you think is actually going to win this election? Not who do you want to win, but who do you think may win?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's utterly close. I think if you listen to David Plouffe on the Harris campaign or Steve Bannon when we were talking more politically outside of the context of January 6th, they both kind of sound the same way, which is that Kamala Harris has a narrow path through the blue wall states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. I think that she's very narrowly in the lead there, but I would not feel at all comfortable if I was their campaign. I think that gives Donald Trump's campaign 3 outs. They can crack the blue wall, win one of those states. I think he's probably the president. I think she has maybe 1 out in North Carolina. So I think she has maybe 1 out and he has 3. So I guess I would rather be her than him because I do think she has a narrow lead in those 3 states. But I think it's extremely close. And I think if anybody telling you anything else, like really is gaslighting you.